Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rita Polite. On December 4, 1998, Michael Polite was at home in the small town of Hopewell, Missouri, United States. At the time, his mother, Rita, was working at a local bar. While she was working her shift, Michael was home alone. Feeling bored, he decided to ride his bike to the nearest store, a supermarket where he often met his friends. When he got there, he ran into his 15-year-old friend, Josh Sansu. Michael invited Josh over and Josh agreed, and Josh spent the night at Michael's house. They passed the time playing chess and video games while they waited. When Michael's mother came home from work, he saw the headlights flashing on the sunroof and realized she was home. After Rita got home, she told the children to go to bed. Michael then woke up near dawn. In his room, he was lying in bed and noticed a strange smoke coming from the crack in the door. Josh, who was sleeping on the floor near Michael's bed, suddenly woke up and looked at him in fear. Michael started calling for his mother, but there was no response. Tensions escalated, and the children began to panic. When they left Michael's room to go to their mother's room, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Josh and Michael saw Rita's legs covered in blood. Their mother's upper body was on fire. Rita was engulfed in flames up to her waist. Without hesitation, Michael ran to get water to put out the fire, calling out to her in the hope that she would answer, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Josh ran to a neighbor's house for help because they did not have a cell phone. By 6:30 a.m., emergency services arrived and firefighters began to put out the fire. After extinguishing the fire, Michael called his sister, Crystal, to share the heartbreaking news. When police arrived at the scene, they found a young man sitting on his bed, in a state of shock. He was unable to stand up and struggled to speak clearly. The horrific sight and smell of burning flesh haunted him forever. Police quickly began an investigation. It was clear that the victim had suffered a traumatic brain injury. She had been struck in the head with a blunt object before being set on fire. The fire chief examined both the body and the crime scene. He quickly determined that gasoline or fuel had been used to start the fire. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene but found no murder weapon. Police quickly suspected the son of killing his mother. Rita's death was motivated by cruelty and hatred towards her. Rita was only 40 years old at the time. In addition to Michael, she had two adult daughters, Crystal and Melanie, both in their early 20s. Rita's family lived in Hopewell, Missouri, a town where residents felt safe enough to leave their homes and cars unattended. It seemed like a peaceful haven, untouched by the violence of the outside world. Sadly, even in such places, terrible crimes can still happen. The town had a friendly atmosphere and the crime rate was so low that most locals often left their doors open at night. Michael's mother, Rita, left the door open without considering the potential danger, which may explain why there was no forced entry. The police's attention was now focused on Rita's son, Michael. Michael's parents, Edward and Rita, met when they were young and eventually married. Their first children were twins named Crystal and Melanie. The girls had vivid memories of their father's cruelty. Although Rita loved Edward very much, he often cheated on her and eventually became abusive, both emotionally and physically. Unable to bear this treatment any longer, Rita decided to get the police involved. The children often witnessed their father's violent outbursts, which later led to behavioral problems, especially in Michael. About a year before the massacre, the family dynamics worsened significantly. During this time, Michael witnessed Edward physically attack Rita. He knocked her to the ground with several blows and began to strangle her. Michael and his sisters were terrified for their mother's life. Fortunately, the children managed to distract Edward, allowing Rita to escape from his grip. Following this incident, the family faced many challenges. In the summer of 1998, after over 20 years of marriage, Rita filed for divorce. Edward sought joint custody of their children, but the kids did not want to live with him. Rita chose not to escalate the situation. When filing for divorce, she cited her husband's infidelity but did not mention the years of abuse she endured. As a result, the court awarded shared custody, forcing the children to visit their father, whom they despised. Michael and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office. Although the teens were clearly not ready to talk, the police began an immediate investigation. On the way to the police station, the patrol car driver noticed Michael making strange comments and showing little emotion. Although the body had not been identified, Michael insisted that it was his mother, since there was no one else in the house. The police, ignoring the possibility that Michael might be in shock and not fully comprehending what he was saying, became increasingly suspicious of his involvement in the incident. At the police station, Michael underwent a voice stress test, which is also known as voice stress analysis. After the test, the officers informed him that he had failed, but this could be attributed to the trauma he experienced after witnessing his mother's death. Furthermore, voice stress tests are controversial and their results are often considered unreliable, usually not accepted as evidence in court. The police also took Michael's shoes, and specially trained dogs detected traces of flammable substances on them, suggesting they were used to ignite Rita's body after the murder. The Michael seemed to be attempting to hide his actions. Michael and Josh both claimed they had no idea what had happened. They were questioned without a lawyer present. According to the teenagers, they had been in Michael's room for some time, sleeping, and had not heard anything that had happened. Michael claimed that he had been in bed and had only come out when he smelled smoke. However, the police did not believe their testimony and the questioning became increasingly tense. Both boys remained in custody. Josh's mother went to the police station to support him as much as she could, while Michael's father chose not to support him and did not appear. On the second day, Josh made a statement on video camera in the presence of his mother and several police at once. He explained that he was not sure what had happened, but that he had woken up in the middle of the night just before the fire and found his friend Michael missing. He also admitted that he was fed up with the situation. The police took this as a contradiction to Michael's statement, which meant that Michael was lying. Josh's statement essentially confirmed the police's suspicions of Michael's involvement in his mother's murder. On December 7, 1998, Michael was arrested for the murder of his mother, shocking both him and everyone who knew him. Michael believed that it was a misunderstanding and was confident that he would be proven innocent and released. He maintained his innocence, but this did not convince the police. Michael insisted that he would never harm his mother, whom he loved dearly. Although they had had some recent conflicts, he hoped to gain support from his uncle and aunt, who lived nearby. His uncle, a politician, along with his sisters, sided with him, believing that he could not have harmed his mother. They believed that the investigation should focus on their father Edward. However, Edward was cleared of the crime because he had an alibi. Many people noticed problems in the relationship between Michael and his mother. The family struggled after the divorce. Financial difficulties affected both mother and children, and Michael, a schoolboy, faced challenges during this difficult transition. The police became suspicious because of Michael's behavior, which was hardly exemplary. In 7th grade, he began skipping school frequently. Teachers were concerned that he might not advance to the next grade due to his behavioral problems. About 10 months before the tragic events, Michael's behavior became significantly worse, and witnesses reported that he had threatened Rita. This led to Michael being taken to a psychiatric clinic. However, doctors found no underlying problems and attributed his behavior to puberty and the stress of his parents' divorce. Michael later admitted that threatening his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. Unfortunately, he could no longer apologize or take back his words. Many troubled teens act in similar ways, but not all of them go astray. Michael was not a criminal. He did not associate with bad influences or get into trouble that would make him a potential suspect. Although he denied any wrongdoing, the police were still fully convinced that he was guilty. Years passed as Michael waited for his Supreme Court hearing. During this time, he was in prison and was deemed extremely dangerous, so he was not eligible for bail. Just before the trial started, the prosecutor offered Michael a plea deal for manslaughter. If he accepted, he could face a maximum of 15 years in prison, but he turned it down. Michael maintained his innocence, stating he should not be punished for a crime committed by someone else. He believed the only person capable of harming his mother so brutally was his father, Edward, but no one paid attention to his claims. In January 2002, Michael, who had just turned 17, appeared in court. The prosecutor presented evidence gathered during the investigation, including shoes that had traces of flammable substances used to burn the body. Tests confirmed that gasoline was the substance used. The prosecution argued that the young man had a tendency towards arson. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him play with fire and intentionally destroying objects for entertainment. A friend of the defendant stated that a few hours before Rita returned from work, they had used gasoline to ignite some trash on the railroad tracks. Upon inspecting the crime scene, police found a canister with a small amount of flammable liquid left inside. The defendant's lawyer explained that although gasoline had splashed on Michael's shoes while they were playing with fire, this did not prove he was responsible for the fire in the house. The defendant did not kill his mother or set fire to her body. From the prosecutor, the jury heard about Michael's behavioral issues and possible mental health concerns. However, these were not confirmed during assessments. Before his mother, Rita, died, the young man's threats to her were considered key evidence that he was involved in the murder. Michael's initial belief that he would not go to prison began to wane. The prosecution argued that Michael attempted to end his life about a month after the murder, citing guilt for harming a loved one. A fellow inmate claimed to have heard Michael confess, but he was never brought to the stand to testify. Michael's defense maintained his innocence, but as he downed and regained his composure, the jury began to suspect that he was hiding something. A key piece of evidence for the prosecution was a video of Josh's testimony from 3 years ago. Interestingly, Josh himself was not invited to take part in the case proceedings. From the start, Michael's defense seemed uncertain. It appeared they either lacked important information about their client or didn't believe he was innocent. The defense focused on the absence of direct evidence from the prosecution, which was actually true. No murder weapon or significant evidence was discovered. Additionally, there were no bloodstains or other traces on the Michael's clothing that suggested an attack had occurred. There were also no injuries that indicated he had struggled with the victim. The prosecution's hearings for the case lasted 3 days, after which the jury deliberated on the verdict. Initially, they struggled to reach a decision because the case was highly controversial. Eventually, they agreed that Michael was guilty of second-degree murder. Since he refused to cooperate with the prosecution, he received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Michael was stunned by the verdict. He accused the court of wrongful conviction and viewed himself as a victim, but he was sent to prison in Missouri regardless. No one paid attention to his claims anymore. This high-profile case drew the interest of several human rights activists who believed in Michael's innocence. However, over time, their interest in the case waned. The state correctional system is known for its extreme cruelty. From the moment he was imprisoned, Michael encountered the harsh realities of local prisons, which are among the most dangerous in the United States. On his very first day, he had a fight with his cellmate, Rome, and was sexually assaulted by prison staff. He realized that to survive in this environment, he had to adapt quickly, otherwise, he might not make it to his appeal hearing. Desperate to live freely again, he was determined to navigate this difficult phase of his life. He maintained that his conviction was due to a mistake. Despite feeling out of place in prison, Michael chose to alter his behavior by becoming more aggressive and getting multiple tattoos, as this was viewed positively by other inmates. This was his way of protecting himself. He repeatedly reached out to his father for help, but Edward did not support him. After 10 years of imprisonment, Michael's situation began to improve. During this time, he contacted the human rights organization Innocence, which advocates for the rights of those wrongfully convicted. The young man's case quickly drew the interest of several lawyers who thoroughly reviewed the case materials. They identified clear flaws in the investigation and the prosecutor's office. Human rights activists believed that Michael's inconsistent statements made after his mother's death were a result of his fragile mental state and the trauma he had endured. Furthermore, it was evident that he was still a minor at that time. Given that his mother's skull was severely damaged, it was unlikely that a 14-year-old boy had the physical capability to cause such an injury to an adult. It was also suspicious that Michael's friend Josh didn't hear any sounds of a fight, suggesting that it likely never happened. Rita lost consciousness after just one blow from someone much larger and older than a 14-year-old boy. Furthermore, the fire chief's belief that the body was burned with gasoline was questionable. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already been put out, and any fuel had been consumed. The prosecutor's case relied solely on the dog's reactions, which indicated the presence of something that could start a fire. However, it's clear that the dogs couldn't accurately identify what they detected. The defense attorneys sought to challenge the key piece of evidence against the teenager: traces of gasoline found on his shoes. They argued that the testing method used to examine the soles was based on chemical reagents, which they believed was not reliable enough. They claimed this method could misidentify traces of gasoline as coming from certain polymers used in shoe production. Eventually, even the state crime lab supported this argument, noting that solvents and adhesives used in Michael's sneakers had chemical compositions very similar to gasoline. However, this information was not commonly known in the 1990s. Additionally, there was a video recording of Josh's statements. He had multiple conversations with police officers both before and after his friend's conviction. He mentioned that when he was 15, he endured lengthy interrogations by police, which were very tiring. Josh clarified that waking up in the middle of the night did not necessarily mean that Michael was harming Rita at that time. It was possible that his friend simply went to the bathroom. Ultimately, Josh expressed uncertainty about whether he could have seen an empty bed in the dark, suggesting that Michael might have been lying underneath it. Josh initially maintained Michael's innocence. However, the police created a misleading story using conversations taken out of context. Recordings from the interrogation revealed that Josh believed Michael was guilty. Josh later recanted his initial statement, revealing that police had threatened him into a plea deal to avoid being incarcerated with Michael. As a result, Josh did not testify at trial. Instead, the prosecution presented a video and audio recording of his testimony that showed potential involvement, without bringing Josh to trial. Michael's attorneys argued that this was because Josh could have contradicted key evidence that the prosecution relied on. Had the defense attorney had the opportunity to speak to Josh, the outcome may have been different. Following the incident, the media focused on securing Michael's release from prison by gathering evidence that disproved the prosecution's allegations. Many people close to Rita believed that Michael's father, Edward, was the real killer. Edward had a strong motive for the crime. After their divorce, the court ordered him to pay a significant amount of alimony to his ex-wife, which severely affected his finances. Many people attested to Edward's poor character and the way he treated his wife. During the divorce proceedings, he openly threatened Rita, saying that she would not live long enough to receive alimony. However, when Edward Polite was questioned by police after the murder, he gave an alibi, he had been more than 100 kilometers away from his home during the time of the crime, and witnesses corroborated his testimony. Therefore, any suspicion against Edward was dismissed. From the beginning, Michael insisted that his father was the only one capable of planning Rita's murder, suspecting that Edward was working with others to commit the crime. This theory was further supported by his legal team. Attention turned to Edward's brother Johnny. Interviews were conducted with neighbors and Johnny's wife, who testified that he returned home around 6 a.m. on the day of the murder and then disappeared overnight without giving a clear reason for his absence. Neighbors also reported seeing his pickup truck near the Rita's home late that night. During the investigation, police discovered a crowbar among Johnny's belongings, which appeared to be the instrument used to inflict the fatal injuries on Rita. The crowbar was sent for examination and was tentatively identified as the murder weapon. Despite this evidence, the prosecution maintained that Michael was guilty. His attorneys filed an appeal. They brought all their supporting evidence to the appeal. Unfortunately, Missouri's judicial system is notoriously strict, making it difficult to overturn a verdict or reopen the case. From the start, the court imposed obstacles on Michael's legal team, leading to the dismissal of their appeal. As the legal battle continued, it seemed that Michael's lawyers were in trouble. Then, in 2021, something important happened. Missouri passed a new law that gave a second chance to juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes. Michael and his legal team quickly seized this opportunity, which played a key role in their case. On April 22, 2022, Michael's two sisters, Melanie and Crystal, brought the entire family to the rehabilitation center to welcome their younger brother, who had been paroled after 23 years. At age 38, as he walked out of prison, Michael looked up at the sky and expressed gratitude to his mother, recognizing her unwavering support for keeping him hopeful during his difficult years in prison. After his release, Michael wanted to ride a bike, a favorite hobby from his life before prison. He moved in with his sister because he had nowhere else to go and hoped to forget the decades he spent surrounded by criminals. To help with this, he started removing the tattoos that reminded him of his time in prison. Eventually, he found work as a carpenter and reconnected with his old friend Josh, who sincerely apologized for his part in what happened. Michael understood and assured Josh that he held no grudge against him. Josh expressed regret for not sleeping on the sofa that night. He believed that if the attacker had come in through the front door and seen Josh on the sofa, things might have turned out differently. Despite the new law allowing for conditional early release, the prosecutor could still initiate a new trial at any time for those who had been released. However, Michael recognized that there were significant gaps in the police evidence against him. The case against him relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be challenged. These accusations had a serious impact on his reputation, but he remained hopeful that the court would reconsider the case, especially since the real killer was still at large. The lawyers proceeded with caution to avoid harming Michael or provoking Missouri's justice system. Eventually, the local sheriff acknowledged the need to reopen the investigation into Michael's mother's murder. This renewed focus required police to re-examine a large amount of evidence that had been neglected for over 20 years. One key piece of evidence, the Rita's car, was also available for analysis. The prosecutor's office collaborated with the defense team, marking a significant turning point for Michael. He had been imprisoned for a murder he did not commit since he was just 14 years old. After spending 23 years behind bars, which represented most of his life, he longed to return to a normal life and felt he was finally on that path. However, he still needed to clear his name completely. Additionally, Michael was determined to find his mother's real killer, convinced that his father was responsible for setting him up. This betrayal had devastated his life while his father continued to live freely. The investigation into the crime was still active, and despite the obstacles presented by the local justice system, many law enforcement officials, including the prosecutor, supported Michael. With their backing, he felt confident that the true criminal would eventually be brought to justice. The investigation is ongoing, and there are indications of progress. However, even if justice is served, it won't bring back the lost decades for Michael. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer Cave was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas, to a family living on a modest farm. Her mother, Sharon, remarried, and her father, Charlie, was a welder. He was a good husband and father, but alcohol turned him into a troublemaker. However, when he was sober, he was calm. Despite the family's ups and downs, they remained close. Sharon worked as an accountant at a chemical plant while raising her family. Jennifer, unlike her outgoing siblings, was quite shy. Jennifer loved reading, which helped her develop her intelligence and memory. Despite her lack of self-confidence, Jennifer was active in school sports and social activities. Her father's abusive drinking habits tore the family apart. After her parents divorced, Jennifer and Clayton lived with their father. They felt great sympathy for him and tried to comfort him. Jennifer wanted her father to stop drinking so much that she ignored the fact that he really didn't want to change. For years after the divorce, in 1999, her mother, Sharon, met a new man named Jim Sedgwick. When Jennifer entered her teens, she changed. She got her braces off, got new glasses, and her appearance became much better. Her personality changed along with her new look. She graduated at the top of her class thanks to her intelligence. Jennifer enrolled in Texas State University as a finance major, but quickly became discouraged and dropped out after her first semester. She then attended community college in Austin and worked part-time at a restaurant in the city to support herself. During this time, she dated Mark, a nice guy from a good family. Their relationship could have led to marriage, but Jennifer became addicted to the nightlife. She partied and drank frequently. Her time spent drinking increased, and along with her marijuana use, her bad habits gradually took over her life. Jennifer's life took a turn when she meets Colton Petoniak. Colton Petoniak was born and raised in Bryant, Arkansas. During his youth, he was known as a smart, attractive boy who was popular with many girls. Colton has a passion for skateboarding and playing the guitar. He attends an all-boys Catholic middle school in Little Rock, where he consistently excels academically and is often named honor roll student. In 2000, Colton was one of 7 seniors and one of 166 statewide finalists for the National Honor Society. During his senior year, he began to have problems with alcohol and violence. This was largely due to his involvement with a wealthy youth group. Colton Petoniak was born and raised in Bryant, Arkansas. During his youth, he was known as a smart, attractive boy who was popular with many girls. However, instead of focusing on his studies, he continued his debauched lifestyle. This led to him losing friends and becoming known for his addiction to alcohol and marijuana. He could have had a bright future if not for these self-destructive habits. After being expelled from his fraternity, he began to engage in illegal drug dealing. His family tried to support him through this, even bringing him back home to live with them. In the spring of 2004, Jennifer and Colton met at a party and immediately connected. Jennifer, always optimistic, decided to give their relationship a try, despite the risks involved. Over time, their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. Jennifer began using drugs with Colton. Colton's luxury apartment became their regular hideout for illegal drug use. Jennifer's addiction became more serious. Her parents tried many times to help her get off drugs, even giving her a car in the hopes that she would come home more often. However, every time Jennifer came home, she failed to keep her promise to quit her addiction. During that time, Colton's condition also gradually worsened. He became paranoid and started carrying weapons to create the image of someone with a criminal record. In 2004, Colton was arrested for illegal drug possession. He later entered rehab. Elsewhere, Jennifer's relationship with her family deteriorated when her parents visited her. They were completely shocked to see that Jennifer had lost a lot of weight. Her image was no longer as healthy as before. Refusing the family's advice to go to a drug treatment center upset Jennifer's parents. Because of that, Sharon and her new husband, Jim, made the decision to stop supporting her financially. They hoped that because of that, she would make more efforts to get her life back. Jennifer did not have enough money to survive on her own, so she was forced to live with Colton. However, after a month of living together, she decided to leave due to some unexpected events. Fortunately, a friend helped her not only by providing a place to stay but also by providing emotional support. After a difficult time, Jennifer's life seemed to be back on track. In early 2005, she began a new relationship with a man named Scott, a nice single father. Scott's lifestyle was the complete opposite of Colton's. Scott worked at a restaurant, sang well, and maintained a healthy lifestyle. When she was with him, Jennifer felt better about herself and looked healthier. She took on the role of a housewife and became the ideal mother figure for his daughter. However, she was still ready to leave at any time if Colton called. On another hand, Colton moved to the Orange Tree apartment complex near the university, where there were parties every weekend. His image changed the views of the people who frequented the place. In addition, there were many healthy things. In the comfortable pace of life, he met Laura Ashley Hall. In contrast to Colton, Laura was infatuated with this man and often showed jealousy towards the other women in the group, especially Jennifer. Laura made a different impression on their friends, who wondered why she was so arrogant and often made fun of anyone. Laura, like Colton, also came from a well-off family. She was an active person, participated in many different activities, and was successful in her studies. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in college but soon dropped out, choosing instead a more comfortable job and lifestyle. Later, Laura and Colton began a romantic relationship. She was also deeply attracted to Colton, like Jennifer. However, Laura's friends noticed that she had changed for the worse, becoming more aggressive, neglecting her work, and not taking care of herself. Many suspected that she had also started using illegal drugs. Beside that, Jennifer entered a new chapter after ending her relationship with Scott. She felt that she did not fit in with his family and did not want to cause trouble. However, she still kept in touch with Colton, who was still deeply in love with her. Regarding their relationship, Jennifer just wanted to keep it as friends. She wanted to get a stable job and go back to college. In August, a new opportunity appeared in her life. She started a new romantic relationship with Michael Rodriguez and found a great job. At a law firm, she impressed everyone after her training and was offered a high-paying consultant position. She was proud of herself and felt truly happy. On August 16th, Jennifer decided to celebrate her new life with her friends. They went to a bar and then to a club. According to a friend, the bouncer at the club refused to let Colton in because of his appearance. This may have led him to turn to drugs. The investigation is still ongoing to shed light on the events that happened that fateful night. The next morning, Jennifer's boyfriend, Michael Rodriguez, checked his phone but found no calls from Jennifer. He recalled that she had promised to call him after dropping Colton off. Michael did not trust Colton's character and lifestyle and was concerned. Around the same time, Jennifer's roommate noticed that she had not come home the night before. The alarm clock was still going off, but no one had turned it off. This worried her roommates as they had a habit of informing each other about their plans. Jennifer's roommate tried to contact her but received no response, which was out of character for her. She was still scheduled to go to work that day, but her work clothes were still hanging on the rack, with no sign that she had put them on and left. This made her roommates even more worried because Jennifer was not the type to leave for work without informing them. The law firm was notified on the morning of August 17th that new employee Jennifer Cave had not arrived for work on time. This was unusual because she had made a good impression during her internship. When a colleague called her at 9 a.m., there was no answer. At 11 a.m., the firm decided to send someone to check Jennifer's home, but there was no answer. The firm contacted Jennifer's mother, Sharon Sedgwick, and discovered that she had also been unable to reach her daughter. The family suspected that Jennifer might have gotten back together with her ex-boyfriend Colton Petoniak, whom they did not like. After more than 12 hours without any news of Jennifer, Sharon reported her daughter missing to the police. The Sedgwicks visited Colton's home, but he refused to meet with them. Jennifer's car was found near Colton's home, making the situation even more suspicious. Although the police searched Jennifer's home and found nothing unusual, they are still investigating based on information from Michael and Sharon, along with the fact that Jennifer's car was found near Colton's home. Sharon and her new husband, Jim, believe that something serious has happened to their daughter. Michael said that Jennifer went out with friends on August 16th to celebrate her new job. One of her friends was her ex-boyfriend, Colton. Jennifer called Michael several times and told him that she wasn't scared but that Colton was acting strangely and that she needed to take him home. However, she did not contact Michael after that. All the clues led investigators to where Colton lived. While the police were still deciding what to do, Sharon and Jim decided to take action themselves. They went to Colton's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. They sensed something was wrong and were about to call a locksmith to open the door. But Jim suddenly discovered an open window and decided to climb in through it. Once inside, he found the apartment in complete disarray. As soon as he entered, Jim was hit by a stench so bad it made him nauseous. He immediately covered his mouth and moved toward the stronger smell. Sure enough, the entire house was empty. And in the bathroom, Jim discovered a gruesome sight, a woman whose head and limbs had been cut off. Nearby, he also found some trash bags and a gym bag. Jim was horrified when he checked inside and discovered the victim's remaining body parts. The freckled legs looked very similar to his stepdaughter's. But the victim's body was so mutilated that it was difficult to identify. Still, Jim hoped the worst would be over for his daughter until the last minute. After calming down a bit, he immediately called an ambulance. Jennifer Cave met a tragic death from being shot in the right arm. The bullet went through her arm, chest, and into her heart, also damaging a major artery. This led to severe blood loss and caused her to die quickly. After that, her body went through incredible and terrifying changes. Forensic experts discovered 18 stab wounds on the victim's body, mainly in the chest and neck. The perpetrator inflicted these wounds after the victim was dead. He then decapitated the victim and shot a bullet through the throat into the head, intending to dismember the victim to easily dispose of the body. The perpetrator severed the victim's upper limbs and placed them in a prepared bag and a garbage bag. The body was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. However, something thwarted his original plan, forcing him to change his course of action. After receiving a search warrant, the police conducted a thorough investigation of the apartment. Police found .38 caliber shell casings in the apartment. The murder weapon was found in Petoniak's car parked in the garage. They also found a large bloody machete in the dishwasher. Toxicology tests showed that the victim had alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in his blood. A road atlas was found at the scene with pages torn out, marking routes in southwest Texas. This suggested that the apartment owner, Colton Petoniak, had fled. Police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest. Investigators conducted interviews with Colton's neighbors to gather information. Nora Sullivan, one of the neighbors, witnessed a suspicious incident at approximately 3 a.m. on August 17. When she opened the door, she found Colton standing there with blood on his body and a handgun in his waistband. Nora asked him what happened, and Colton said he had gotten into a gunfight with several people. However, Nora did not hear any gunshots that night and suspected he was lying. Investigators also discovered that Colton had contacted Laura twice that night, but did not have specific details about the conversation. On the morning of August 17, Colton went to a hardware store and purchased items such as a saw, mask, gloves, and cleaning supplies. He used these items to destroy Jennifer's body and planned to clean up the apartment to remove any traces of the crime. However, at that time, the couple Sharon and Jim unexpectedly appeared, possibly scaring Colton into running away, foiling his plan. While investigating Colton's apartment, investigators found a vital clue that led directly to him. He and Laura Hall were spotted in Mexico, where they had crossed the border in her car. Local authorities circulated Colton's photo nationwide during that time. The couple enjoyed their time going to movies and restaurants. They stayed at a hotel in the border town of Piedras Negras, where an employee recognized him as a wanted man. The employee took a photo of him and sent it to the police. Mexican law enforcement arrested the couple and took them to the border, where U.S. officials arrested them. Laura Hall was released from custody pending further investigation. On August 23, 2005, Colton was charged with the felony murder of Jennifer Cave. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. The prosecution presented evidence recovered from Colton's apartment, including a videotape from the store and receipts for the items purchased. Colton claimed he had no memory of the night of the crime due to amnesia caused by excessive alcohol and illegal drug use. He did not initially deny harming Jennifer, but insisted he had no memory. He claimed that he woke up to find his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom later that day. After discovering the body, he contacted Laura, who advised him to purchase a saw and cleaning supplies. She helped Colton dismember the victim and hide the parts in bags. The prosecution argued that Laura was responsible for Jennifer's injuries after her death. Colton later suggested that Laura may have been motivated by jealousy and implied that she was involved in the act of revenge. However, both defendants pleaded not guilty. But the evidence of Colton's responsibility was overwhelming. Jennifer's body was discovered in Colton's apartment. His fingerprints and DNA were found on items such as knives, saws, and guns collected at the crime scene. Colton's car also contained weapons related to the crime. He also purchased cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt about Colton's guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton was sentenced to 55 years in prison, but could be eligible for parole after serving at least half of his sentence. This means Colton won't be released until 2060 at the earliest. The case against Laura Hall is more complicated. The prosecution argues that she may have acted out of blind love for Colton. Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a shop towel, and even the gun used. However, the defense argues that these traces only prove her involvement in dumping the body, not the initial act. They can't prove she fired the first shot. Laura claims she only learned about the case after Colton told her about it and that she was forced to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses to their time in Mexico said the couple seemed happy on the trip. In 2007, Laura was convicted of obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence and sentenced to 6 years in prison. A subsequent trial in 2010 increased the sentence to 11 years in prison and a $144,000 fine. Laura was eventually released on parole on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring. She completed her sentence in August of that year. After her parole, Laura's whereabouts remain unknown. Colton Petoniak remains in prison after multiple unsuccessful appeals. In his appeals, Colton claims he has no memory of the events surrounding Jennifer's death. However, he asserts that several witnesses heard Laura confess to the crime and that the prosecution knowingly withheld this information from his defense team, potentially setting him up. Despite Colton's allegations, his appeals have been denied, raising public questions about the case. Jennifer's parents, however, firmly believe that Laura was more involved in the death than she admits and that her punishment was too lenient. Unlike Colton, Laura has shown no remorse or regret for Jennifer's death, referring to her in derogatory terms. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Grace Mill Lane. Grace Emmy Rose Mill Lane was born on December 2, 1996 in Wickford, Essex, to her parents Gillian and David Mill Lane. She was the youngest of her 3 siblings. She was known as a lovely, outgoing, cheerful daughter who thought about her family and loved creativity and art. Because her family was so close to her, Grace maintained daily contact with her siblings and parents, even when she rented a house near her school, Lincoln University, where she studied advertising and marketing. In 2018, Grace Mill Lane, 21, graduated with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing. Like most young people at that age, Grace decided that she would take a year off before settling into her career. She decided to travel to South America before going to New Zealand. She embarked on a 10-month solo adventure in October 2018. She initially visited Peru before making her way to South America. On November 19th, Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, ready for a 2-week holiday traveling around the Upper North Island. It was in New Zealand that Grace met her Tinder match, a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, on December 1st. Jesse Kempson was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, but he grew up in Wellington. His parents separated when he was young, and for a time, he was raised by his grandparents. He moved to Australia with his mother as a teenager, but in 2016 he returned to New Zealand and lived in a hostel in Wellington. Grace didn't know that Jesse had a darker side, a more cruel soul, in him. Jesse was known to be a very charming guy, and he used that to manipulate people. On one occasion, Jesse lied to his former landlord that he was a professional softball player, newly signed by the New Zealand national softball team, the Black Sox, and claimed that his contract money would come so he could pay the rent. That went on for 2 months. And the homeowner only learned the truth when Black Sox management announced that no one knew who Jesse was. Unfortunately, the homeowner later discovered that he had fled elsewhere without his knowledge. He also sometimes claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, came from a millionaire family looking to buy a top restaurant in Auckland, had connections to the New Zealand Immigration Service, and many other lies that he mentioned to everyone. In reality, Jesse was nothing more than a dreamer who could only impress people with wild lies. His former roommates in a Green Lane boarding house found Jesse disturbing and untrustworthy before he moved into the city life apartment. On another occasion, a woman he lived with claimed he stole money from her house and ran away again, costing the city life homeowner thousands of dollars. Jesse was an enigma to many. He lied throughout his life, and it seemed to work. He also seemed to get away with it time and time again. Back at the dorm where Grace was staying, she was chatting happily with Jesse. Grace had no doubts and was captivated by Jesse. Grace even sent a text message to her best friend Anna back home, telling Anna that she agreed to Jesse's confession. Since it was Saturday and her 22nd birthday was the next day, Grace didn't want to be alone and decided to go out. She decided it was time to meet Jesse. Jesse lived just 5 minutes away from where Grace lived, and Grace thought they needed to get to know each other a little better. On that special day, Grace got ready for her big evening and felt nothing but excitement and optimism. Grace left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. On the evening of December 1st, she wore a black dress and carried a small handbag. Little did she know that her night would take a devastating turn. Initially, the evening seemed to have gone well as she and Jesse visited the Blue Stone Room and left together around 9:30. However, when her 22nd birthday arrived the next day, Grace did not respond to birthday wishes from family and friends. This unusual silence caused anxiety and panic, especially among her family members. It was unusual for Grace not to keep in touch as she regularly updated her family about her trip and shared photos of her adventures. Therefore, Grace's parents contacted Auckland police and reported her missing on December 5th. Thanks to an extensive network of CCTV cameras across the city and reports from witnesses, police were able to quickly track Grace's movements on the night she disappeared. They also identified the man with her, Jesse Kempson, who became a key figure in the investigation. Jesse stopped at the Blue Stone Room, a local bar next to the City Life Hotel where he was staying, on the night he was supposed to meet Grace. About half an hour before the scheduled meeting, Jesse was seen drinking 4 bottles of beer, sitting alone in a bar. Meanwhile, Grace arrived early at the Sky Tower, the location they had agreed upon. This location was chosen because of its high visibility and beauty. Sky Tower is a famous landmark in New Zealand's largest city and can be easily recognized from afar. When Jesse arrived, the two quickly recognized each other and greeted each other warmly, with Jesse hugging her as she smiled and approached him. They then went to a restaurant and burger bar on the first floor of the adjacent Sky City complex. Their entire time together at Sky City was captured on camera, showing Jesse and Grace chatting while riding the escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar. When they arrived, they ordered cocktails from the bartender and sat at the table to talk. They left the bar after an hour and a half and walked to a nearby Mexican restaurant. Over a period of time, they consumed a large number of drinks, including 2 pitchers of margaritas and a pitcher of sangria. They then moved to the Blue Stone Room, where Jesse had previously been drinking alone. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse gently kissed Grace. This marked the beginning of several shared kisses that took place over the next hour. During this time, there were brief interruptions, once when Jesse walked away for a moment. And another time when Grace checked her phone, as well as when she sent her last text to her friend, Anna. Jesse eventually walked away, took out his phone, and left a message on Grace's Facebook profile, saying she looked beautiful and radiant. Unbeknownst to him, this seemingly harmless act eventually turned the detectives towards him. Around 9:30 p.m., Jesse and Grace left the venue, walked toward the City Life Hotel lobby, and took the elevator to room 308. What happened while Jesse and Grace were in the hotel room is unknown. What is confirmed is that Jesse killed her. At 1:30 a.m., Grace's body was brought into room 308. Following the discovery, police determined that Grace had never left the building and that Jesse had chosen not to seek emergency assistance following the death of Grace. After Grace's death, Jesse conducted numerous internet searches using his cell phone. His online searches included searching for the terms hottest fire and Waitakere Range. Waitakere was the area where Jesse later tried to bury Grace's body in a shallow grave. Jesse also browsed a website to find video content. In addition to these actions, Jesse also took 7 intimate and explicit photos of Grace's body after her death. These photos included close-ups and posed shots that he arranged to take. The next morning, while Grace's body was still in room 308, Jesse sent a message to a woman he met on Tinder to go on a date the same day. Jesse's actions continued and he was recorded on CCTV as he went to an entertainment store to buy a suitcase and a supermarket to buy cleaning supplies. After these purchases, He rented a red Toyota hatchback and went out in the afternoon to meet the woman from Tinder at a bar in Ponsonby called RRY, while Grace's body remained in his room. On December 2nd, Jesse returned to his hotel room around 5:45 p.m. and rented a carpet cleaning machine, saying he needed it to remove a red wine stain. Then, he parked the rental car outside the hotel, took the luggage cart from the front desk, and went upstairs. He returned with the cart, which then contained 2 large suitcases. He loaded his luggage into the car and moved it to a nearby parking lot. Unbeknownst to the others, one of the suitcases, a silver one, contained Grace's body, while the other suitcase was used as bait to avoid arousing suspicion. Throughout the day, security cameras recorded Jesse changing clothes multiple times. Early the next morning, around 6:15 a.m., Jesse was seen leaving the hotel and driving away, stopping briefly to buy a shovel at a store outside of town. On December 7, 2018, Grace's father, David Mill Lane, traveled to New Zealand to make a sincere appeal for information about his daughter's disappearance. A detective identified Jesse as a person of interest after Grace's mother noticed he had sent her a Facebook message at 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, just 11 minutes before Jesse and Grace left Blue Stone Room and went to his room. During Detective Diana Levinson's initial questioning, Jesse claimed that he met Grace but broke up with her at 10 p.m. on Saturday, and that was the last time he saw her. However, detectives obtained CCTV footage from the hotel, which proved Jesse was lying. At the second interview, Jesse was forced to admit to killing Grace, but he claimed it was a sexual accident after she asked him to strangle her in an attempt to make the experience more pleasurable. After the interview, he was arrested and led police to the location of Grace's body. The body was discovered about 4 p.m. on December 9th in Waitakere Ranges Regional Park, off Scenic Drive. An autopsy was conducted on December 10th. An autopsy showed Grace had been strangled and bruises on her body showed she had been restrained. Jesse's trial began in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Jesse claimed Grace's death was an accident caused by rough sex gone wrong, but the jury rejected this explanation and found him guilty. Jesse Kempson had been convicted of murder on November 22, 2019, at the age of 28. During his trial, it had become clear that he had a history of making women feel extremely uncomfortable, especially those he had met or communicated with on Tinder. 8 months before meeting his victim, Jesse had dated another British tourist on Tinder and had taken her back to his motel room in Oakland. When she had refused to have sex with him, he had assaulted her while she had been crying and frozen in bed with fear. The female tourist had kept the incident a secret until she had recognized Jesse in the media after he had been charged with murder. Jesse's online interactions with another woman had also raised concerns. He had shared explicit messages where he had detailed his sexual preferences and had explained why he had them. It was believed that his desire to control and dominate might have contributed to Grace's death. In a separate trial, Jesse had been convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend. He had assaulted her, had threatened her with a butcher knife, and had forced her to perform humiliating acts. Jesse had claimed that he had been sent by the CIA to kill her, displaying a disturbing pattern of behavior. Throughout the trial, Jesse had shown no remorse for his actions and had refused to accept responsibility. On February 21, 2020, Jesse had received a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 17 years without parole. The tragic events surrounding Grace's story had highlighted the need for increased safety measures for travelers, especially young women hoping to explore the world. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Swartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club. As Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els van Doren had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked Doplab residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot's chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between Oplab and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot's chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els van Doorn. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els van Doorn's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els van Doorn. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els van Doorn's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els van Doorn's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els van Doorn had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els van Doorn. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els van Doorn. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els van Doorn's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els van Doorn. The letter affirmed that Els van Doorn's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els van Doorn's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els van Doorn to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els van Doorn. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els Van Doren's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els Van Doren began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els Van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els Van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els Van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els Van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els Van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els Van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els Van Doren, who will be deeply missed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. David came from a devoutly religious family and had a relatively normal upbringing. During his high school years at Princeton High School, David participated in various activities, including Bible Club, Chess Club, Science Club, and a cappella choir. David enrolled at Virginia Tech University after graduating from high school to pursue a degree in electrical engineering in Blacksburg, Virginia. Thanks to his exceptional skills in computer engineering, David landed jobs at leading defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She is the eldest of 6 children of Wayne Robinette, a preacher, and Phyllis Robinette, who worked at Walmart and sang in the church choir. The Robinette children's home environment was tense due to frequent conflicts between their parents, which led to harsh treatment. Louise and her sisters were sexually abused by a family member as children. This traumatic experience was a secret kept within the family. According to Louise's younger sister, Elizabeth, Louise played a protective, gentle, kind, and nurturing role. She comforted her siblings during their parents' violent conflicts and protected them from abusive relatives. At the age of 15, Louise met 22-year-old David Turpin at church. They kept their relationship a secret for fear of Louise's parents' reaction. However, when the truth was discovered, Louise's mother Phyllis eventually accepted their relationship, partly because David came from a devout Christian family and Louise convinced her. David and Louise decided to keep their relationship a secret from her father, Wayne, knowing that he would be furious if he found out. In January 1985, 23-year-old David visited Louise's school, Princeton High School, where he had graduated 5 years earlier. He convinced the staff to let him take Louise out of class, and she left willingly with him. They began their journey south, planning to elope. When Louise's parents discovered she was missing, they called the police. Before the police could catch up with them, the couple headed to Texas, where they planned to secretly marry. However, when they were stopped, they agreed to return to West Virginia. When they returned home, Wayne and Phyllis's reactions were surprisingly calm. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter, Louise, to date David. However, when he saw how much they loved each other, he realized that it would be difficult to separate them. So Wayne agreed to let them marry on February 11, 1985, in a small ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia. 2 years later, Louise's parents divorced and Louise's father, Wayne, took a job as the chief deputy assessor of Mercer County. After marrying David, Louise began to live more independently and freely. Louise was happy with her new life. In 1988, Louise gave birth to her first daughter, and 18 months later, their second child was born. David was then transferred to General Dynamics, and his family moved to Fort Worth, Texas. They settled in a modern neighborhood called Meadow Creek. Louise's family lived a lavish lifestyle thanks to David's high-paying job. Louise, eager to show off her family's newfound wealth, invited relatives from West Virginia to visit. Having grown up on a tight budget, Louise was happy to show off her current success. To make their visit comfortable, David and Louise paid all the expenses. The Louises welcomed a baby boy in 1991, bringing them even more joy. However, by 1992, the Louises were in debt. Despite their financial struggles, they continued to live a lavish lifestyle. In 1993, Louise became pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. In 1994, Louise's oldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary School. She looked neglected, with greasy, unkempt hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene. Her appearance made her the target of teasing by her classmates. In 1995, Louise's family welcomed a fifth child, a boy. Louise's family seemed carefree despite their financial difficulties and continued to splurge on luxuries, treating relatives to expensive meals. When Louise's younger sister Elizabeth joined them on their 1996 vacation in Fort Worth, they stopped at a casino in Louisiana on the way. While at the casino, Louise asked Elizabeth to babysit the children so she and David could gamble. They asked Elizabeth not to tell anyone about this, knowing that it was against their Christian values. During this visit, David and Louise's gambling led to losses. Tensions became apparent when David claimed that Louise had a serious gambling addiction and blamed Louise for their financial difficulties. While staying with Louise's family, Elizabeth was shocked by the family's disturbing behavior. David and Louise did not show much affection for their children and tightly controlled every aspect of their lives. Elizabeth was particularly concerned about David's behavior, as he often invaded Elizabeth's privacy by entering the bathroom while she was showering, making her feel uncomfortable and insecure. In May 1997, the Tuppins had their fifth child. By September of that year, concerns about their eldest daughter and the possible signs of sexual abuse began to grow. In 1998, the family had a sixth child. Although David had a well-paying job, the family's financial situation worsened due to their frequent gambling, which caused significant financial strain. In the spring of 1999, the eldest daughter dropped out of school, as did the other children. Louise and David announced that they were homeschooling their children. In late 1998, the bank foreclosed on the family's home in Fort Worth, so Louise and David moved to Rio Vista, Texas, a less populated area. The new home that Louise and David had in Rio Vista was in serious disrepair when they moved in. It was dirty, stained, and smelled bad. Before moving into the Rio Vista home, the Louises had their seventh child. Over the next 6 years, the family added 5 more children. Over time, the parents, David and Louise Turpin, became increasingly irresponsible and abusive. They physically harmed their children, beating, choking, and whipping them with belts, often for trivial reasons such as not letting them go to the bathroom. The children were also severely neglected in terms of personal hygiene, with some only bathing once a year. Despite purchasing nutritious food, David and Louise often withheld food from their children, forcing them to starve. The parents would tease their children by leaving uneaten meals in plain sight. Instead, the children were fed cheap frozen meals, resulting in severe malnutrition. This neglect was evident in the children's slow development, pale skin, and youthful appearances that did not match their actual ages. In 2004, Louise's family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their old home in Rio Vista, which had become uninhabitable due to years of neglect, garbage accumulation, and rodent infestation. In 2008, Louise Turpin, then 40, had a shocking conversation with her sister Teresa. Louise revealed that she and her husband David had abandoned their Christian education and stopped attending church. Instead, they had become interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that she and David had engaged in wife swapping, a lifestyle that involved having sex with other couples they met online. What was even more disturbing was that they often left their younger children at home, in the care of their older siblings, while they went out to meet strangers they had met online. This drastic change in Louise, who had always been caring and responsible, worried her older sister Teresa. Despite their financial struggles, Louise's family often went to Disneyland in matching outfits, taking lots of happy photos. Louise made sure to send these photos to her family and her parents. The only indication to Louise's family that the children were okay was through these photos, which showed them appearing happy despite being very thin. In 2014, Louise's family moved to Paris, California, about 20 miles north of Murrieta. By this time, the child abuse had reached an extremely violent level. David and Louise had tied their children to their beds with ropes. If the children tried to escape, the ropes were replaced with chains and locks. The children were locked in the room for around 20 hours a day, forced to endure the stench that permeated the air. In 2015, the family welcomed their 13th and final child. Soon after, the family traveled to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. Faced with the horrors of their living conditions, Louise and David's 17-year-old daughter made the brave decision to seek help by reporting the abuse to the police. She climbed out of the window and quickly called the police on the phone. During a tense 20-minute 911 call, she detailed the deplorable living conditions and the countless abuses she and her siblings endured. With photographs of their desperate situation as evidence, she waited for the police to arrive. When police arrived at the scene, they witnessed a horrifying scene: a severely malnourished girl who appeared to be about 10 years old. The girl led police to the front door, where they found Louise. Upon entering the home, police immediately smelled a strong stench that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the strong odor, police continued to investigate and made a horrifying discovery: 3 younger children chained to beds. The home was in a state of extreme disarray, with trash and dirt covering the floor because there was no toilet access. Police quickly took the younger children to Riverside University Medical Center for evaluation and care, while the older children were taken to Corona Regional Medical Center. David and Louise Turpin were arrested on January 14, 2018, for child abuse and torture. Within 4 days, they faced multiple charges. Each of them was charged with 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abuse, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment. David Turpin also faces a separate charge of lewd conduct with a child under 14. Among their children, a 2-year-old child showed no obvious signs of abuse. In addition to being abused, the children were treated extremely cruelly by their parents. They suffered severe physical abuse that resulted in neurological damage. The children of Louise and David lacked basic life skills and knowledge. Although their parents, David and Louise Turpin, bought them toys, the children were not allowed to play with them. They were forced to stay up until the early hours of the morning, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not allowed to go to bed before that time. In 2018, the court took action against the Turpin parents. On January 24th, the judge ordered that David and Louise have no contact with their children for 3 years, and that all contact be through their attorney. On June 21st of the same year, the court decided that there was enough evidence against David and Louise to proceed to trial. The trial concluded on February 22, 2019. On that day, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 counts including torture, abuse, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. During the trial, David and Louise had an emotional reunion with their children. The children appeared to have forgiven their parents and were affectionate toward David and Louise. Each expressed a wish for their parents to be well and shared that their lives were going well. David and Louise sincerely apologized for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success in life. David and Louise were subsequently sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of 2022, Louise, 53, and David, 60, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in their home shocked the community and beyond. The community came together to support the children, giving them hope and a new start in life. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Otavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Otavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Otavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Otavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Otavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Otavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, The friend had explained that Otavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Otavio to get his side of the story. Otavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Otavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Otavio and Heather, Otavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Otavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Otavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Otavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Otavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Otavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Otavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Otavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but it still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a light-hearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, he admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett is an 8-year-old girl who has just completed elementary school. She lives with her single mother, Elaine, who has worked hard to provide her daughter with a comfortable life. Elaine always tries to give Jennifer a happy childhood, full of love and care. Thanks to that, Jennifer has become a cheerful, active girl who loves to explore and learn. However, Jennifer still has a common fear in children, which is the fear of the dark. Therefore, she often sleeps in the same room as her mother. Elaine understands this fear and is always by her daughter's side. On the night of August 9, 2009, mother and daughter slept in the same room again. But Jennifer did not sleep well, constantly turning and lightly kicking her mother, making it difficult for Elaine to sleep. Elaine woke up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested Jennifer sleep in her own room so she could rest before the new workday. But Jennifer replied convincingly, "Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight because I love you," and she went to her own room to sleep for the rest of the night. Elaine regretted the decision for a long time, but at the time, she couldn't have known what would happen next. The next morning, Elaine went to wake Jennifer but found her missing. She found the window facing the parking lot wide open. Elaine quickly called 911. When the police arrived, she said she hadn't heard any noise or screaming after Jennifer went back to her room to sleep alone. Their apartment was on the first floor, and the window in Jennifer's room looked out onto the parking lot, causing Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment wasn't the ideal place for her and her little girl to live, but it was the best they could afford at the time. However, Elaine's parents decided to help her and her daughter find a new place to live. They bought a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother planned to move there in a few months, and they were there the day before Jennifer went missing. After her daughter went missing, Elaine was extremely sad and remorseful. She said that Jennifer was all she had and prayed that she could return. The police worked tirelessly to find Jennifer. Fortunately, Elaine did not have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in the fields and accidentally discovered a little girl. When they arrived at the scene, the police found 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of a field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was serious, with a cut on her throat from ear to ear, causing her to lose a lot of blood and turn pale. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors tried to save her life. Due to the injury to her neck, Jennifer was unable to speak. After surgery, Jennifer's condition stabilized, the bleeding stopped, and her breathing was steady. However, when Jennifer woke up from surgery, her mental state changed dramatically. She began to fear all men, including male doctors, making it difficult for her to recover. During this time, Jennifer was constantly panicking and even reacted defensively when male doctors tried to approach her. Elaine tried to explain to her daughter that everyone around her wanted to help and care for her. However, Jennifer did not trust anyone. Her behavior was understandable when she finally revealed what happened to her that night. The challenge was to gently get the information out of her. Now, considering she was only 8 years old, this was really difficult. Jennifer was too scared to speak directly to the investigators, so the detectives gave her a notebook and pen to write down her answers to their questions. Because she was afraid of men, Jennifer wrote a letter to her mother, who then forwarded it to the police. Although she was only 8 years old, Jennifer's written responses were surprisingly detailed and accurate. Jennifer explained that she went into her room, turned on the lights, and began reading a book to help her fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep but was then awakened by a stranger who carried her out of the house. The stranger ran down the sidewalk with Jennifer in his arms. As soon as Jennifer realized what was happening, she tried to scream, but the stranger covered her nose and mouth. The stranger then put Jennifer in his car and identified himself as an undercover police officer. However, Jennifer's instincts told her that something was wrong. She looked around and saw her mother's car in the parking lot, which made her even more confused about where they were going and why. Jennifer had been taught that the police were trustworthy, but she had also been warned not to trust strangers. Her fear and recent experiences with strangers made her suspicious of the stranger's words, and she sensed that something was wrong. Jennifer asked the stranger to drop her off at her grandparents' house. But he refused, saying that they were not home. However, she noticed that her grandparents' car was in the driveway, which suggested that he was lying. The man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her house. He told her to watch the moon closely and said that her mother would come when the moon changed color. Jennifer waited anxiously for her mother to pick her up, but her mother never showed up. She suspected that the man was preparing for his true intentions. After 5 minutes, the stranger announced that her mother would not be coming and that they needed to drive further. They stopped at a dead-end street, where Jennifer asked the stranger to prove that he was a real police officer. She questioned him, asking where his gun and badge were. When he said that his gun was in the back seat, Jennifer turned around to look for it. That was when the stranger removed her underwear. Jennifer then lost consciousness, so she was not sure how long she was under his control. Jennifer slowly regained consciousness as she was dragged through a field, her ankles constantly rubbing against the road. The pain from the branches and rocks stabbed into her back, but she pretended to be dead and kept quiet, realizing that this was her chance to survive. Her attacker eventually let go of her legs and left her in the field. Jennifer heard him walk away, followed by the sound of his car door slamming and the sound of the engine driving away. When she regained consciousness, Jennifer found that she could not scream, and she was not sure why. She mustered enough strength to bring her right hand to her neck, where she discovered an open wound. Her hand was covered in blood. The exact time she had been missing is unknown, but it is believed that she had been lying in the field for between 12 and 14 hours. As the sun began to set, Jennifer saw the lights of passing cars nearby and heard the sounds of children. A dog approached her several times, seemingly trying to get its owner's attention, but no one came. Throughout her suffering, Jennifer was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Each time she woke up, she could not believe that she was not dead. Jennifer had accepted her fate, thinking that she would not survive. But everything changed when she heard the sounds of children nearby. Suddenly, something hit her leg. When Jennifer later regained consciousness, she found herself being reassured by a police officer who repeatedly told her, "You've been found, you'll be okay. Just stay with me." The officer's words provided comfort to Jennifer as she was loaded into the Lifelight helicopter. The aftermath was a challenging experience for 8-year-old Jennifer, who struggled to communicate due to her inability to speak. She had to write her answers down on paper to convey her story. Additionally, her fear of men made the situation even more complicated. To make her feel more comfortable, her mother stepped in to ask questions on behalf of the police, relaying Jennifer's answers to the officers waiting behind the door. What's remarkable about Jennifer's story is that, despite her ordeal, she was able to remember the stranger's name. She remembered the man telling her his name was Dennis and describing him as fat, with a possible scar on his face. Police also sought the assistance of forensic pathologist Lois Gibson. Although they could only communicate with Jennifer through gestures and notes, they were able to create an extremely detailed composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch was released in the hope of getting information from the public about the identity of the man in the drawing. Meanwhile, police continued to investigate the scene and found Jennifer's clothes about half a mile away, along with a man's clothes. Despite hopes of finding DNA on the clothes to catch the culprit, no matches were found. Jennifer gradually recovered from her injuries. Despite her young age, she showed incredible resilience. During her recovery, there was a moment when she was upset about a chocolate bar that she couldn't eat. She screamed in frustration and let out a weak sound. The doctors were amazed to see that her vocal cords, which had been nearly severed and were not expected to heal, began to miraculously recover. After a while, Jennifer was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. She returned home and went back to school, eventually finishing high school and college. After that, Jennifer decided to become a children's librarian. Even so, she never forgot what happened that night. Every day, she felt like she was chasing a criminal, and that the criminal could be anyone. Jennifer thought that it could be her new neighbor, or a stranger at the post office or the grocery store. She always felt like the person was watching her and would come back to kill her. Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan. For the first time in years, she was able to trust a man. They fell in love and Jennifer felt a little more secure. However, around that time, the clues to her attacker began to fade. The chances of finding him were slim. Her case was passed from investigator to investigator. But still no progress was made. 18 years after that terrible night, Jennifer received a phone call. It was a notice that Detective Tim Cromie was taking over her case and wanted to meet with her. Tim Cromie pledged to do everything he could to catch the criminal. Jennifer trusted him, and Tim Cromie told her that he would do everything in his power until the end of his career to get the answers she needed about this case. To help with the case, Tim decided to involve FBI agent Richard Renison in the investigation. Richard had worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered a large amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and shortly after she was found. Jennifer's underwear, shirt, and other items belonging to the perpetrator were particularly important, so they sent a sample of the DNA found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although the detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in the 19 years since the crime, they understood that the age of the case could cause the evidence to not be prioritized in the lab. Despite the years, their work finally paid off. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford, the man Jennifer had described years earlier. The 8-year-old Jennifer had described the man with astonishing accuracy, even though she was on pain medication at the time and unable to speak. Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas. His DNA was entered into the national database after an attack on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. Dennis was released on parole on February 4, 2000. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for drunk driving less than half a mile from his home. He later remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Investigators Tim Cromie and Richard Renison found a lot of information about Dennis. In 1987, Dennis had been arrested in Dickinson, 3 years before the attack on Jennifer. The investigators discovered that he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer's residence, and Jennifer was able to confirm his identity as the kidnapper. They then requested a photo of Dennis's driver's license from when he was 19. Upon seeing the photo, they were shocked because the man looked very similar to the sketch created based on Jennifer's description at age 8. On October 19, 2009, Dennis Cyril Bradford was arrested. However, he claimed that he did not remember why he stopped near Jennifer's residence or why he had mistreated her. Dennis also revealed a detail that investigators did not know. After the attack, he felt so overwhelmed by guilt that he attempted suicide with a handgun. Despite reaching for the gun, Dennis was ultimately unable to pull the trigger and decided to seek psychiatric help. During his stay at the psychiatric hospital, Dennis accidentally visited the hospital where Jennifer was still a patient, and he was very close to her at the time. Immediately after the interview, the detectives informed Jennifer of Dennis Bradford's arrest. She expressed gratitude to the detectives, especially Detective Tim Cromie and Agent Richard Renison, for their efforts and their promise not to drop the case. She also admitted that she looked forward to facing Dennis Bradford in court because he was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial. Jennifer was given the opportunity to choose a court date, and she chose August 10th, the 20th anniversary of the attack. A turning point in the case came on May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, when Dennis hanged himself in his cell. Jennifer faced another challenge in her life due to the trauma Dennis caused. She almost lost the ability to conceive. Fortunately, Dr. Craig Witz, after hearing Jennifer's story, generously offered her his services for free twice in late 2012. As a happy ending, Jennifer and her husband eventually welcomed their daughter Jenna and then their son Jonah. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elle Edwards. Elle Edwards, a 26-year-old woman, she was a vibrant and beautiful young woman who worked as a cosmetologist at a local beauty salon and assisted a dermatologist. Her positive attitude and kindness have helped her win the hearts and satisfaction of all her customers, even the most difficult ones. Edwards is a highly skilled beauty professional, known for being cheerful and always smiling. At the same time, she was determined and constantly working towards her goals and dreams. On December 24, 2022, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with their family, and Edwards eagerly awaited her return. To celebrate this special occasion, Edwards, her sister, and their friends decided to go to the local pub in Liverpool's Wallasey Village, UK. Here they were having a fantastic time, laughing, dancing, and singing karaoke in a joyful atmosphere. Without their knowledge, someone with ill intentions was nearby. As they exited the pub at approximately 11:50 p.m., someone placed an emergency call. Shortly thereafter, a minimum of 12 shots were fired. Edwards was struck by 2 bullets, and she's suffering a severe head wound. The emergency services were immediately dispatched to the scene. They quickly loaded Edwards into an ambulance and rushed her to the local hospital. Unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries en route, as they were fatal. When the police informed Edwards's family of the tragedy, they were shocked and disbelieving. No one could comprehend how this could have happened to Edwards, a beautiful and lively young woman. It was unthinkable that she could have had enemies who wished her harm. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives had no leads. The attacker launched a surprise assault and then quickly disappeared, leaving behind a single shell casing in the victim, who was severely bleeding at the location where the crime occurred. The assault was swift yet clearly premeditated, affording Edwards no opportunity for survival. However, it was unclear whether the attacker meant to target Edwards or if Edwards was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and got hurt by someone who was mentally unstable. A car of unknown origin pulled up near the entrance of the pub, and shortly thereafter, gunfire erupted. Apart from the fatality, 4 other men sustained gunshot wounds of varying degrees. All of the victims were young adults, aged between 22 and 33. Police initially believed Edwards may have been a random victim of the attack. It was known that criminal gangs operated in the area and the shooting might have been a confrontation between gang members. However, this was just speculation that needed to be confirmed or ruled out during the investigation. To learn more, the detectives looked into Edwards's background. Like the witnesses, Edwards's relatives had no idea who would want she dead. The detectives planned to speak with more witnesses and those who had been shot at by the unknown criminal. They also asked the pub owner for security footage. The investigation involves conducting interviews with numerous individuals and thoroughly reviewing extensive video footage. Multiple police officers were working on the case. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions following the attack. The large number of victims raised concerns about whether the attack was a spontaneous act of aggression or a targeted assault. To investigate, all witnesses were interviewed, and authorities began analyzing mobile communications data, which proved to be a time-consuming task. The media was alerted to aid in the investigation. Law enforcement officers appealed to the public for assistance, urging anyone with valuable information to come forward and visit the police station. Specifically, they were looking for any video recordings that might have been taken by eyewitnesses, which could potentially show the car used by the perpetrator. To encourage people to share any relevant information, the police held a meeting with local residents. It was assumed that someone might have witnessed the attack or have information about the perpetrator. To encourage people to come forward, community leaders reassured residents that they should not be intimidated by the criminals or the local feuding clans. The police visited residents door to door to gather information and provide support. Specially trained officers worked with Edwards's family to provide emotional support during this difficult time. Through their efforts, it was discovered that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Although witness accounts were limited due to the darkness, the vehicle was most likely a dark Mercedes. Later, outdoor surveillance cameras confirmed the events. The killer drove into the parking lot, but didn't immediately open fire. Instead, he observed the pub visitors for some time from his car, which was positioned to give him a clear view of the entrance and most of what was happening inside. He seemed to be waiting for the most convenient moment to attack. After a few minutes, when Edwards got out, the killer quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots in a row, then immediately got back in and drove away. Investigators studied the recordings and concluded that the attacker acted alone, without any backup. Unfortunately, it was impossible to determine exactly where the perpetrator fled. The detectives conducted a thorough investigation, going door to door to speak with local residents, providing a detailed description of the car and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Their goal was to identify the killer. The streets were patrolled 24/7, and within 2 days, they had detained 2 suspects. However, their involvement in the crime couldn't be proven without proof. The detectives then made a public statement, vowing to continue their pursuit of the unknown shooter until they were brought to justice. This was intended to reassure local residents, who were outraged by the rising crime rates and the authorities' seeming inability to stop it. There was speculation that the attack may have been sparked by a feud between local gangs, with Edwards being an innocent bystander. However, this theory was still unconfirmed and required further investigation. It was determined that the intended targets of the shooting may have been Jake and Curran, 2 members of the local Beechwood gang who were at the pub that evening. They had a long-standing and intense feud with another group vying for control of the territory. On December 29th, police arrested a person of interest, but he was not the shooter. Although he had a solid alibi, the detective suspected that he may have been involved in planning the attack. Around the same time, authorities identified the dark Mercedes car used by the killer to leave the pub's parking lot. However, due to a lack of direct evidence, the name of a third suspect was not released. The car was tracked through surveillance footage and identified with the help of cameras. However, the police were unable to respond in time. On December 31st, a report was filed with the police department stating that a fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a dark Mercedes engulfed in flames, which resembled the perpetrator's vehicle. The fire had completely burned out the vehicle, destroying valuable evidence. It's clear the perpetrators knew the police were closing in, so they intentionally destroyed one of the key pieces of evidence. Although the fire didn't completely destroy the car, investigators confirmed it was used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes had been stolen shortly before the attack and didn't belong to the perpetrators. The arson was likely committed to hinder the investigation. Following the January 11th murder, police took 2 more suspects into custody in Central Wales: Connor Chapman, 22, and a 23-year-old woman. Connor was a familiar figure to police, with his extensive criminal record. Before the murder of Edwards, Connor began his downward spiral into a life of crime with increasingly bold lawbreakings. His early offenses included a car theft under severe circumstances, and he was repeatedly suspected of robbery, hooliganism, and making threats. At one point, Connor led police on a high-speed chase before ditching the car and hiding in nearby bushes. Upon being caught, he feigned innocence, claiming he had no idea what the officers were talking about and was simply waiting for a friend. This brazen act earned him a degree of notoriety, landing his details in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman, a resident of Birkenhead, Liverpool, was raised by his grandparents after being abandoned by his parents at a young age. He moved into their house and struggled academically, eventually dropping out of high school before his exams. As a teenager, Connor was considered a troublemaker and had his first brush with the law in 2014, when he was 14 years old, for shoplifting. 2 years later, in 2016, Connor committed another offense by stealing a car. He was caught driving the stolen vehicle without a license or insurance, violating the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, he was convicted of possession of a controlled substance, while also violating a restraining order by entering areas of the city he was banned from, all under police surveillance. Connor was prohibited from appearing in public due to the risk he posed to society. However, in 2018, he disregarded the ban and was detained by the authorities while in possession of a knife and banned substances. The same year, Connor Chapman came to the attention of the general public after a failed attempt to evade the police in a stolen vehicle. The incident occurred when the city patrols spotted a stolen Audi and instructed the driver to stop and exit the vehicle with hands raised. However, 18-year-old Connor refused to comply, leading to a pursuit. During the brief chase, Connor committed multiple traffic offenses, including exceeding 80 km/h in 30 km/h zones, repeatedly driving into oncoming traffic, and ultimately crashing into the curb at high speed. The impact sent the car careening to the side and spinning around. Unable to continue, Connor exited the vehicle and fled on foot. However, the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. Connor claimed he was waiting for a friend, but it was clear he was not telling the truth. In court, Connor's lawyer explained that his client had been influenced by a group of older friends who were a bad influence. The court decided not to punish Connor and released him. It was discovered that he had attention deficit disorder, along with several other conditions, which were diagnosed by a private specialist. Connor in question was sentenced to up to 8 months in prison due to numerous traffic violations and reckless behavior. Additionally, he was banned from driving after his release. By the time he reached adulthood, he had accumulated 14 convictions for 30 separate offenses, demonstrating a clear pattern of disregard for the law and social norms. It is clear that he has no intention of reforming and constantly refuses to conform to the rules and norms of society. Although his behavior was recognized as potentially hazardous, there were no sufficient legal grounds to isolate him from the community, primarily because his actions had not yet resulted in serious harm to anyone. The public expressed anger and frustration with the authorities for not taking action against Connor Chapman, a man with multiple convictions. Despite his numerous run-ins with the law, he continued to commit crimes, putting innocent lives at risk. In January 2020, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for possession of a cold weapon and substances in a public place. The police publicly warned the community about him, and after serving his sentence, he was wanted for at least 5 more crimes. When caught, Connor boasted about spending more time in prison than out, seemingly proud of his record. By 20, he had accumulated 19 sentences for 43 crimes. However, he was released again in the summer of 2022, just 6 months before the death of L. Edwards. During this time, he appeared in court again, and his lawyer attempted to garner sympathy by sharing that Connor's first child was born while he was in prison. At this point, Connor's girlfriend was pregnant with a baby girl. He claimed to have turned his around and wanted to make amends, but this was just a ruse. In reality, he wanted to escape and return to his life of crime. The police were already aware of his involvement with a local gang that sold prohibited substances, but he was being tried for a lesser offense, the burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24th, a violent altercation erupted between 2 rival gangs in Beechwood Estates, near the wooden church. The gangs were fighting over territory, but failed to reach an agreement. Seeking revenge, a young gangster armed himself with a submachine gun and waited 3 hours to track down his targets, Kieran and Jake Duffy, who were at the Moke pub. Just before midnight, he drove to the parking lot, identified his victims, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Then he exited the car and fired 12 bullets into the building. Duffy was seriously injured, but he survived despite the life-threatening attack. However, L. Edwards was not as fortunate. She was hit by 2 bullets in the head. Edwards fought for her life, but she died in the medic's arms on the way to the hospital. Edwards had unintentionally crossed paths with the killer's targets that evening and had no idea the night would end so tragically. The pub was crowded at the time of the attack. 1 person was killed, and 4 others were wounded. A 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man was injured in the wrist. Fortunately, none of these injuries were life-threatening. Edwards's friends tried to provide her with first aid and performed CPR at the scene. Unfortunately, their efforts were not enough to save her life. Edwards's sister, Lucy, was much luckier. She had been living in Dubai and had flown home to celebrate Christmas with her family just minutes before the attack. She had already left the pub, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but Edwards had wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, a funeral was held for Edwards, who was tragically killed in a gang-related incident. Hundreds of people attended to pay their respects to the innocent victim. A hearse pulled by 4 white horses carried her body to the local church. As a sign of respect, the pub where she had last celebrated was closed for the day. The pub's owner also shared a message of support for her family on social media. Connor Chapman was subsequently charged with multiple offenses, including murder. It was discovered that Connor had an accomplice, 20-year-old Thomas. A video recording was found on Thomas during the searches, made shortly before the attack. In the video, Connor is seen handing over a weapon and stating his intention to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, Connor and Thomas hid the stolen Mercedes together, planning to dispose of it later. Although the murder weapon was never found, DNA traces from the killer were detected on one of the shell casings. It became clear that Connor had loaded the weapon before the attack, as evidenced by the presence of red gloves found at his house, which were visible in CCTV footage from Moke. After committing the crime, Connor and Thomas abandoned their car and ordered a taxi under a false name to throw off investigators. They used the taxi service to cover their tracks. At approximately 5 a.m., they went back to the location where they had hidden the car in order to take additional steps to cover their tracks and hide their involvement. Thomas Nord was found guilty of all charges in July 2023 and received a 9-year prison sentence. The relatively lenient sentence was due to his limited prior criminal history compared to Connor. Jake and Kieran, members of the local Beechwood gang, were wounded during the attack but managed to survive. given their gang affiliation and the ongoing conflict with a rival group. The violent incident was not unexpected. It became known that on December 23, 2023, Connor Chapman's group, including Kieran and his friend, were attacked and beaten by another individual from the same group. Although they did not receive serious injuries, this incident occurred just a day before they were attacked with firearms. At the time, they seemed to view the beating as a random altercation and subsequently went to a pub to relax. After the shooting incident, while the shooter, Connor, awaited sentencing for the murder of an innocent victim, Kieran and his friend were already imprisoned. Kieran received a 27-month sentence for attacking members of a rival criminal group and an additional 9 months for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. It appeared that Kieran and his friend were attempting to avenge the attempted murder. As a result, prohibitive court orders were issued against them, imposing various restrictions. Although this approach did not prevent the gang from engaging in further criminal activities, it did provide a basis for more severe punishment if they continued to disregard the court orders. The public was outraged that gang members received lenient sentences despite committing multiple crimes. It became clear that the existing bans were ineffective in maintaining public safety. For instance, Connor was banned from visiting the area where the pub was located, but he still managed to steal a car and enter the pub despite having a driving ban. During the trial for L. Edwards' murder, Connor attempted to dispute the claim that he was the person seen in the CCTV footage. He claimed that at the time, he was at home wrapping Christmas gifts. Nevertheless, police-sufficient evidence was collected to expose the facts. The hearings lasted 3.5 weeks, exposing all the incident leading up to the attack. It was discovered that the motive behind the attack was a turf war between two rival gangs. Connor had no connection to L. Edwards, he was completely indifferent to her fate, as well as the fate of the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven solely by uncontrolled rage. After attempting to murder two rivals, Connor planned to escape to Spain to evade capture. He used a stolen car and disposed of the murder weapon, trying to avoid detection by the police. He also avoided using public transportation. Ultimately, detectives apprehended Connor at the airport. After being arrested, Connor attempted to mislead the police by stating that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. Instead, he claimed it was a shared vehicle used by his criminal group for distributing substances. He denied being the driver and continued to try to convince the jury that he was not the one who opened fire that evening. In a desperate bid to escape the consequences, Connor claimed he had only just discovered that someone from his group had used the vehicle to attack the pub. Before the jury deliberated on the verdict, L. Edwards' father gave a heartfelt speech, expressing his hope that the perpetrator would never be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones as a free man again. The jurors, comprised of P. Asen and Sim Janine, reached a unanimous verdict after 3 hours of deliberation. They found Connor Chapman guilty of all charges, citing that he had committed the crime with callous disregard and showed no remorse for the accidental killing of L. Edwards, taking away her promising life. Rather than showing regret, Connor spent several days systematically eliminating all evidence and traces of the murder that could implicate him. The motive behind the attack was attributed to a rivalry between criminal gangs. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 48 years of his sentence. After the verdict was announced, L. Edwards' father raised his fist in triumph. However, the incident sparked widespread public outrage. The city's residents felt unsafe knowing they were caught in the middle of a turf war between rival gangs. These gangs possessed a large number of firearms and had shown a willingness to use them, as evidenced by L. Edwards' murder. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sarah McLynn. Harold Sasko was born in Titusville, Florida, on September 11, 1961, and later became a resident of Kansas City. His family had 12 siblings, and he was known to be responsible and help his siblings with housework. After college, Harold opened his own pizzeria and expanded his business, opening 2 more restaurants in Lawrence and Topeka. In 1990, he relocated to Lawrence with his then-wife Anna and their 3-year-old daughter Mendez. Following this move, he also launched a 3rd restaurant in the nearby city of Topeka. However, his dedication to his business led to problems in his personal life, causing a rift in his marriage and eventually a divorce. Harold was a respected member of his church and prided himself on being a dedicated man. Those who know him find him to be kind, thoughtful, and meticulous in his management work. However, on January 17, 2014, Harold vanished unexpectedly, leaving behind many unanswered questions surrounding his disappearance. The day started like any other Friday, with the weekend just ahead. People continued to go about their daily business, including the staff at his pizza shop. However, when they arrived at work, they found the restaurant deserted and quiet. Typically, Harold would be there to open the kitchen, but he was nowhere to be found. What's more, no one had heard from him in several days, which was unusual. Concerned for Harold's safety, staff contacted police and asked them to check on him at his home on West 26th Street. Later that day, an officer visited Harold's residence, knocking on the front door and window, but receiving no response. The officer then looked inside and saw a man lying face down on the floor. Police entered the house and confirmed the man was Harold. He was lying in a pool of his own blood and had clearly been dead for several days. Moreover, the scene suggested that Harold's death was no accident. His hands were bound behind his back with zip ties, indicating that someone had intentionally restrained him. His legs were also tied, further suggesting a deliberate act. The most disturbing detail, however, was the deep gash in his throat, which had severed the bone and made survival impossible. The officers were confronted with a gruesome scene. In addition to the ties and the fatal wound, the police found several empty bottles at the opposite end of the room, as well as a phone and laptop that didn't belong to Harold. They also noted that Harold's car was missing from the driveway. One peculiar piece of evidence was the word "freedom" scrawled on the wall in Harold's blood. As the police presence in the Harold's house, this attracted the attention of curious neighbors. The officers decided to use this to their advantage by asking more questions. Through these investigations, that they discovered Harold wasn't living alone. Neighbors reported that he was living with a girl he referred to as his stepdaughter. This information proved crucial for the investigation, as it revealed that there was someone who not only knew Harold well and had regular contact with him but was also likely present at the crime scene. It was eventually confirmed that the stepdaughter was 18-year-old Sarah McLean, who had been living with Harold for the past 2 years. However, Sarah was missing. This caused the police to become suspicious. Finding her became a top priority, as her disappearance left many unanswered questions. She could have been a victim, witness, suspect, or none of these. It was crucial to locate her. Then police notified Harold's family and friends about the incident. A funeral for Harold was planned for February 8, 3 weeks after the incident. The police asked the public to contact Douglas County forensic investigators with any information about Sarah's location. A $1,000 reward was offered for any information that could help find her. Sarah McLean was born on July 9, 1994, in Topeka, Kansas. She was raised in a loving family with her parents and 2 siblings. And she had an especially strong bond with her sister. As a child, Sarah was known for being shy and kind. She spent most of her childhood being homeschooled, which limited her social circle to her neighborhood. However, her life took a challenging turn when her parents divorced during her teenage years. This significant change had a profound impact on Sarah, making her more vulnerable. As she adjusted to her new situation, she encountered challenges that made her teenage years even more difficult. After her parents separated, Sarah's previously sheltered life left her vulnerable to people who exploited her innocence. Sadly, she experienced abuse from a neighbor, which altered her personality and behavior. Her mother was deeply concerned about this change, because she found it difficult to adapt to the new way of life among them. Sarah started secretly leaving her house at night to spend time with a bad crowd. This led to her frequently using drugs and alcohol to cope with her emotional pain. After her parents' divorce, Sarah, 14, no longer wanted to live at home and found a job at a pizzeria to start a new life. Her manager, Harold, 50, initially seemed kind, but rumors among staff suggested otherwise. He told other managers to only hire young, attractive women. While working at the pizzeria, Sarah's routine consisted of waking up, going to work, spending time there, and returning home. However, she often spent her nights drinking before going back to her family's house. Reports indicate that Sarah was usually sober only at work, but even then, her work efficiency is still not high. Despite frequently showing up drunk and nearly getting fired multiple times, she kept her job, likely because Harold felt sorry for her and knew she needed support. When Sarah turned 15, she experienced another traumatic incident, where a man attacked her and burned her with cigarettes. After that, Sarah's mental health, which was already fragile, deteriorated significantly. She stopped attending work, lost friendships, and fell into a deep depression. Within a year, at just 16 years old, she attempted to end her life. Thankfully, her family found her in time and called for medical help. Following a 5-month hospital stay, Sarah made a full recovery. Upon her hospital discharge, Sarah was touched by the support she received from her loved ones and friends. Among the messages of support she received, one in particular caught her attention, a message from Harold, who used to be her supervisor. Harold offered to be Sarah's confidant, someone she could confide in. He would drive her around, take her out to eat, and listen to her problems. Since Sarah had no one else to turn to, she eventually accepted Harold's help. During one of their outings, Sarah opened up to Harold about her past, sharing her traumatic experiences with men, her drinking, and other struggles. Harold realized that she wanted to move out of her family's house. Upon learning about Sarah's traumas, he suggested she move in with him. Although the offer raised some concerns, Sarah was in a vulnerable state, feeling lost and hurt. Harold's offer provided her with an escape, and at 17 years old, she agreed to live with him. Sarah's life seemed to settle down after she moved in with Hal. She found a new job, away from the pizzeria, and Harold took good care of her. Her dog moved in too, and she even thought about attending college. However, Sarah's mother, Michelle, was not pleased with the situation. She found Harold odd and the whole story suspicious. Whenever Michelle wanted to discuss this issue with Sarah, their conversation would become tense, and they would argue loudly, causing Sarah to distance herself even more. Michelle doubted that Harold's intentions were as pure as he claimed. She worried that Sarah was too naive to see the potential issues. After her parents' divorce, Sarah's father had cut off all contact, leaving a void that she was trying to fill. The situation became even more unsettling when Harold asked Sarah to call him Dad and told their neighbors that she was his stepdaughter. As the news spread, Sarah's colleagues started asking about her relationship with Harold. Sarah would tell them that he was just a friend, but from the outside, it seemed unusual for a 50-year-old man to take in a troubled 18-year-old girl. Her peers likely suspected that something was off. After Sarah turned 18, she felt uneasy as Harold's behavior changed drastically. He started buying her alcohol and illegal drugs, made jokes about them being in a romantic relationship, and even suggested a sexual relationship. Harold kept a record of everything he spent on her, including rent, cosmetics, and substances in an attempt to make her feel indebted to him. He made it clear that she couldn't leave until she paid him back. As a result, Sarah felt trapped and eventually gave in to Harold's advances, leading to a 10-month period of a sexual relationship with the man she once considered a father figure. They had sex several times a week, and Sarah's only way to cope was to consume alcohol and use substances, further increasing her debt to Harold. Harold's behavior was inconsistent, often criticizing Sarah one moment and complimenting her the next. For instance, he would mock her appearance, specifically her nose, and then offer to pay for plastic surgery, which Sarah, unsure of herself, eventually agreed to. Harold treated her like an object he owned, rather than a person with feelings. He exerted control over her by covering expenses, including $16,000 for dumb implantation and planning to spend another $16,000 on breast implants. These costs would be added to her debt, forcing her to pay him back when she was financially able. Feeling trapped, she felt she had no way to escape this situation. Harold became even more controlling and threatening. He claimed he would not let her escape, which made her mental health problems worse. To cope with her situation, Sarah was prescribed antidepressants. However, this ended up adding to her financial burden, as she also had to pay for the medication. Sarah had reached her breaking point, and her mind was haunted by dark memories of her abusive past and the terrible burden of depression. She often found herself on the brink, struggling to cope. Just when she thought she had found someone she could trust, that person turned out to be an abuser. This was the final blow for Sarah, and she began to act in ways that would transform her from victim to killer. After visiting a pet store, Sarah purchased a rabbit and signed a waiver, then took it home. Later that evening, a manager from Harold's Pizzeria visited her house for dinner and drinks. When he opened the refrigerator, he was shocked to find a rabbit carcass instead of beer. Sarah admitted to killing the rabbit and revealed that it was not her first victim. The manager, feeling utterly perplexed by the circumstances, accepted the dinner invitation out of politeness, but left for home afterwards. This was a significant warning sign that hinted at Sarah's potential for violence, but it was overlooked. It was later questioned whether Sarah was truly capable of harming a human being. Initially, Sarah was reported missing. However, as the investigation progressed, she became the prime suspect. Detectives soon discovered that she had packed her belongings, taken the dog, stolen a car, and left town. Although initially believed to be heading to Texas, Sarah changed her plans and went to Florida, drawn by the warmer weather and scenic ocean views. Based on this new information, she was officially declared a wanted person. Sarah was a prime suspect in Harold's murder and considered mentally unstable, posing a threat to others. As a result, she was the subject of a nationwide manhunt that lasted for 11 days, with many officers across the country on the lookout for her. On January 25, 2014, after evading capture for over a week, Sarah McLin was finally apprehended in Everglades National Park. She was found sleeping in Harold's stolen car with a loaded gun beside her. The police also discovered $2,400 in cash, 2 additional guns, an axe, and several knives, one of which had Harold's blood on it. Following her arrest, Sarah underwent a 3-hour interrogation, during which she confessed to the murder. According to her account, on January 14, 2014, Harold returned home from work and decided to fix the broken sound system. He requested Sarah to bring him a beer, and then another, and another. Harold collapsed to the floor in exhaustion, unaware that Sarah had slipped a large dose of sleeping pills into one of the beers he was drinking. Sarah had already made up her mind that Harold had to be killed. Sarah restrained him with zip ties, grabbed a hunting knife, and slit his throat. As a result, Harold died shortly after. Following the incident, Sarah took a shower, washing off the blood while listening to her favorite music. She then called her workplace, claiming she would be out for a few days due to a family member's passing. Sarah packed her belongings, including a photo of her sister, took the dog, and fled in Harold's stolen car under the cover of night. To avoid detection, she left her cell phone and laptop behind. During the interrogation, Sarah openly discussed her motives. She explained that she had been trapped in the house Harold's, deeply in debt to he sought to control her. As a result, she became his target, suffered abuse, and was eventually treated as his property. Sarah's anger fueled her desire for revenge, and she was willing to face any consequences to achieve it. In her conversations, she revealed a disturbing fascination with violence and admitted to having thoughts of it for 2 years. Additionally, in a disturbing admission, Sarah confessed to killing rabbits simply out of curiosity. Sarah's confessions put her in a precarious situation, as she not only admitted to killing Harold but also took pleasure in violent acts. It became evident that Sarah would have to stand trial. However, her confessions also showed that she was a woman dealing with difficult mental health problems. Therefore, it was necessary for her to undergo a psychological evaluation to better understand her mental state. The evaluation would help identify any underlying psychological disorders, in addition to her newly expressed tendency towards violence and her reports of memory lapses, during which she felt detached from her own mind. After a thorough assessment, Sarah was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. As it turned out, Sarah had multiple personalities within her, each representing a different side of her complex character. These included Vanessa, a fierce warrior, Alice, the sensitive and emotional part, and Mila, a feminine, gentle side. However, the most tragic version of them was the unnamed individual who bore the full weight of the trauma and oppression. During Sarah's trial, her defense team centered argument around dissociative identity disorder. According to Sarah, one of her alternate personalities, Alice, had suicidal thoughts but was convinced by her other personalities not to harm herself. Instead, they collectively decided that killing Harold was the only solution. The defense team argued that Sarah was in a state of clinical dissociation when she committed the crime, implying that she was not fully in control of her actions. However, the prosecution argued that despite the severity of the abuse Sarah suffered from Harold, the investigation suggested it was consensual. Despite acknowledging the authenticity of Sarah's mental disorder, the judges ultimately found her guilty of murdering Harold. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years, a verdict that shocked both Sarah and her family. The sentencing decision raised concerns that the court had not adequately considered the long-term abuse Sarah endured and her mental state at the time of the crime. As a result, many felt that her punishment was disproportionately harsh. In response, Sarah filed an appeal, arguing that the court should have taken her history of abuse into account during the trial. Fortunately, by that time, more evidence of Harold's horrific behavior had come to light. Upon analyzing his computers, detectives discovered a large collection of illegal pornography. Furthermore, another woman reported that Harold had abused her 2 daughters. Considering this new evidence, Sarah's appeal led to a reduced sentence of 25 years, a 50% decrease from the original sentence. Despite this new information, Sarah remains incarcerated. The judge acknowledged that Harold had indeed abused and manipulated Sarah, but emphasized that this did not justify her premeditated murder. Initially, Sarah was a victim of Harold's exploitation. He was a master manipulator, deceiving many in with his charm. Some individuals still recall his generosity, as he had helped employees in financial. Harold's family acknowledges his wrongdoing but also remembers his positive qualities. They believe he needed help, not death. Similarly, Sarah's family agrees that she should face consequences for her actions but thinks the sentence was too severe, given the circumstances of her trying to escape her abuser. Harold was a complex individual, well-liked by many, yet with a darker side. His story shows how life's difficulties, traumatic incidents, and not having enough support can result in very unfortunate consequences. Sarah was abused by someone she trusted, suffered lasting damage to her mental health. However, this trauma does not excuse her intentional killing of another person. Ultimately, Harold's story teaches us to look beyond a person's appearance, as their true nature may be hidden. Harold, perceived as kind and generous, was actually manipulative and predatory. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Peter Tobin. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children born to Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed an impulsive personality, prompting his parents to send him to boarding school in 1953 when he was only 7 years old. However, this did not work, and he was sent to a reformatory. After completing his time there, he moved to Brighton, England. There, Peter began a relationship with Margaret Mount, a young typist who was attracted to his personality. They married in August 1969, but soon, Peter's ruthless, controlling, and abusive personality manifested itself. Not only that, Peter also became involved in criminal activities. A year later, he was convicted and imprisoned in England for theft and counterfeiting. Margaret decided to divorce him in 1973. Peter then married Sylvia Jeffrey, a 30-year-old local nurse, who was also attracted to his charm. That year, they had their first son, Ian, and a year later, a daughter, Claire, who unfortunately died shortly after birth. Sylvia was devastated by the loss of her child, became a victim of Peter's abuse, and decided to leave in 1976, taking their young son with her. Years later, when he was in his 40s, Peter was ready for a new romantic relationship. This time, he chose Kathy Wilson, a sensitive, naive, and impressionable 16-year-old girl. This made it easy for Peter to start a relationship with Kathy. The two moved in together, and soon after, their son, Daniel, was born. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. This was a difficult time for Kathy. Her husband was controlling, preventing her from going out and becoming increasingly violent. Eventually, Kathy bravely decided to run away with her son in the late 1990s. Kathy's departure brought out the worst in Peter. After Kathy left, Peter met a gentle girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976 and was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton. She had 3 siblings, Sharon, Lee, and Lindsay. However, arguments arose between Peter and Vicky and they quickly divorced. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay lived with their mother and moved to South London. Sharon still lives in Bath, but this did not prevent Vicky and Sharon from maintaining the same close relationship as before. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. On a hangout with Sharon, Vicky checked her fare and went over the bus route with Sharon. They hugged goodbye. At the bus stop, while eating a bag of chips, Vicky met Peter. He pulled Vicky into his car, raped her, and then killed her. When Vicky failed to visit her mother's house, and there was no news of her, her family began to search for her. They reported her disappearance to the police. As the police investigated the case, Vicky's image became prominent across Scotland, and the search for her became one of the largest in the country's history. The runaway theory was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was found near the main bus station in Edinburgh. It was, in fact, a false clue planted by Peter to throw investigators off track. The attempt was successful, sending the investigation off track. Detectives spent 2 months searching London unsuccessfully. It was then revealed that Vicky's mother had died. Over the next 10 years, Vicky's family and townspeople continued to pursue the case, but with more than 7,000 names on file, nearly 4,000 statements taken, some 500 documents and 380 potential physical evidence, all to no avail. The case was eventually dropped. The next young woman to have Peter's misfortune was Dinah McNichol, an Essex native with a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician and her mother had died in a car accident many years earlier. At 18, Dinah was a kind, cheerful girl and a great friend. She had just graduated from high school and had high hopes for the future. She was torn between taking a year off to travel or going to college, but she was undecided. On the first weekend of August 1991, Dinah attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a boy named David Tremlett. They quickly fell in love. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The next day, Dinah helped him take down the tent and they agreed to each hitchhike home. As they were both tired, Peter showed up and offered to give them a ride. David got out of the car first, and Dinah saved Peter's number before parting ways. Alone with the strange driver, the girl was about to face a real nightmare. On Monday, August 5, 1991, he did the same to her as he had done to Vicky. Dinah's scarf became a crime tool. After the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dinah's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When Dinah's family saw the withdrawals from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. They knew she had carefully saved every penny and planned to use it for travel or education. As the days passed, the family lived in fear and uncertainty, which was the worst thing. Although no one said it, everyone believed that something terrible had happened. If Dinah were still alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. In 1993, he settled in Hampshire, renting a flat in Leek Park, saying he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, 2 14-year-old girls went to visit Dinah but did not see her. So they asked the neighbors if anyone had seen Dinah, which led to them knocking on Peter's door. Peter invited the 2 girls into his house, ostensibly to wait for Dinah. They saw his friendly 5-year-old son and agreed without suspicion. While the child was asleep, Peter began to torment the 2 girls. He threatened them with a knife and forced them to drink alcohol, then beat and raped them. One of the girls was seriously injured. Fortunately, the child woke up in time and saved them from the same terrible fate as the 2 previous victims. Peter wanted to hide the truth from his son, so he decided to leave the apartment with the child. Before leaving at around 2 a.m., he turned on the gas stove to complete his monstrous plan. However, the 2 girls were lucky to wake up and escape. They went to the police and reported everything that had happened. After that, Peter returned the child to his mother and joined a sect called the Jesus Fellowship under a false name. But the media published his photo, provided by the police, and his face became widely known. With the help of BBC Crime Watch, Peter was finally arrested after 40 days on the run in Brighton. Peter appeared in court on May 18, 1994 and pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent assault on 2 young girls. As a result, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter was released in 2014 at the age of 58 without serving the full sentence. After his release, Peter returned to Scotland with the aim of hiding in the same area to avoid being identified as a sex offender. He evaded capture for a long time until 2006. During this time, Peter used a false name and posed as a homeless person. He sought refuge at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Glasgow. Under the name Peter McLaughlin, Peter approached a charity couple from the church group, Dennis and Katie Curran. Katie still felt uneasy about Peter despite his frail appearance. On the other hand, having been raised Catholic, Peter felt comfortable in the church. He begged there, which helped him gain sympathy from the parishioners. This gave Peter the freedom to move around unnoticed and provided him with an ideal hiding place. Here, Peter met Angelika Kluck, a 23-year-old girl from Poland. She came to Scotland in the summer of 2006 to work and pay for her language lessons. Angelika was living in the rectory of St. Patrick's Church and doing cleaning work. Peter took an immediate liking to Angelika and convinced her to help him with various tasks. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelika helped Peter paint a shed. Some parishioners saw them together. But unexpectedly, Peter attacked Angelika at the back of the chapel. Leica Brown, 47, and her husband, Andrew, 46, were at home when they heard a woman screaming through an open window. Leica described the scream as a short, loud sound, like someone being forcibly restrained. The scream made her nervous and she got up from her chair, but when she got to the window, she couldn't see anything. Hours passed and the parishioners noticed that Angelika was no longer there. That was when Dennis and Katie quickly reported the unusual disappearance to the police. The police immediately began investigating and interviewed every member of the community. During these interviews, it was discovered that the last person anyone saw with Angelika was Peter, albeit under the guise of a homeless. He eventually became the prime suspect and the police came to question him, but found no evidence. The investigation continued. Peter knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the body and traced it back to him, so he fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation and began to suspect that this might not just be a disappearance. Everything they found, as well as the testimonies they gathered, made him think that Angelika was unlikely to be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered the body in the chapel. This news shocked British society, especially because of the location chosen by the perpetrator to hide the body. Looking at the injuries sustained by the girl, Detective David suspected that the perpetrator was not acting for the first time. However, there was more news to come. The DNA found at the crime scene and on the victim's body matched the data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned that the man they were looking for was Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints were also found at the crime scene. The first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was also sent nationwide for distribution and the Scottish police contacted the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search throughout the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Peter, who was in London, tried to hide in a place where he believed he wouldn't be sought. He went to a hospital, pretending to have heart problems, claiming to have chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. He identified himself as a plumber and called himself James Kelly. He was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso, who conducted several tests. However, something in his demeanor and behavior made the doctor uncomfortable. Initially, he avoided eye contact, which was unusual for a patient. Then, when the tests didn't reveal any physical reasons for the pain he claimed to be experiencing, the doctor became suspicious. His suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and the doctor contacted the police. This phone call changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken to a room and Alan went to talk to him. He was immediately arrested. Although initially, he was charged only with a violation of the sex offender registry, this thing allowed the officers to buy time to prepare a criminal case against him. Evidence gathered by the police team led by Detective David led to Peter's trial for the crimes committed against Angelika in late March 2007. Despite all the evidence against him, Peter denied committing any violent acts against the young woman. However, in an attempt to shift blame for the rape, he claimed that they engaged in consensual sexual activity. Peter also denied providing false information to the police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings, his lies and manipulations proved futile as he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team suspected that there were more mysteries to Peter's story. During the trial, the detectives further investigated Peter's life, gathered more evidence and built a profile with the cooperation of various law enforcement agencies. To avoid affecting the case involving Angelica, they chose to carry out their work discreetly and carefully. The joint police investigation was called Anagram. Investigators identified links between the disappearances and locations that Peter had visited. The investigation revealed 2 exact links, one in Bathgate and one in Margate. A search was then carried out at Peter's old house on the coast and they found a knife with traces of DNA hidden in the attic. However, no other findings were made at the location. Investigators then visited the house where he lived in Margate and established that he was a dangerous serial offender. A search of the house revealed a secret grave in the garden that he had created for his son. Investigators dug up a sand pit in the garden and found the body of a woman. Further searches at the same location uncovered another body. A woman's handbag was found at the crime scene and was collected for DNA analysis. As well as identifying the 2 victims, the handbag was also analyzed. Although the handbag clearly contained DNA, there was no match in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, investigators found a DNA match to Peter's fingerprints. This was a vital lead and they decided to pursue this line of investigation. On November 14, 2007, the authorities confirmed that one of the bodies was that of Vicky Hamilton, who had gone missing at the age of 15. Her family had waited 16 years for any information about her. They later identified the second body as that of 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Crown Prosecution Service charged Peter with Vicky's murder, leading to his trial. When Vicky's father, Michael, saw Peter, he was restrained by the police, as at that point he just wanted Peter to know that he was there to defend his daughter's honor and remember her. Peter faced sentencing after a month of trial on December 2, 2008, when he was convicted of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life in prison. A year later, in December 2009, Dinah's trial took place. On December 16, due to the defense's failure to provide evidence to exonerate his client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. As a result, he was given an additional life sentence. 5 months before his trial, a report on November 22, 2007, stated that Peter Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates in prison, but he only suffered minor injuries. During the investigation, Peter Tobin also confessed to a total of 11 murders. Peter died in hospital on October 8, 2022.